Good evening, everybody, and welcome to GeoIntel. My name is Cody Jordan. Before I get into this, I'm going to fix my camera because it always goes out of focus for some reason. Hopefully that's a little bit better. We should have a pretty good show today. We got a lot to get into. This week has just been absolutely ridiculous in terms of news. The news cycle just has not ended. If you've been paying close attention, I'm honestly sick and tired of taking notes for the show. It's been driving me up a wall this week. My camera's still not focused also. Try to get that one more time. There we go. Way better. Every time I take a sip of water, it just loses focus and it's a never-ending ordeal. I need to get a better camera. But regardless, okay, now that that's out of the way, got a lot to talk about regarding Iran. There's been a ton of updates there. Not a lot has changed necessarily, but there's been a ton of updates. We're going to talk about Canada. I guess that's kind of the featured story in so far as how it is going to relate to Greenland, although it's not going to be the biggest part of the story. The main focus is going to be Iran. We're also going to talk about Venezuela, some of the updates there. Again, not a bunch. And then maybe one of the more fun topics, hopefully, to get into is going to be some of the recent updates regarding immigration in the United States, a lot of what's going on in Minneapolis, even some of the recent statements made by a U.S. representative in Michigan regarding all of this. So, should be a good show, hopefully. We'll go ahead and get right into it. So, we'll start with Iran. If you've been following the show, you know that there's been not endless, they've now quelled them, but there were seemingly endless protests going on that lasted roughly 2 weeks. From December 28th, there was a merchants' protest that quickly grew out of control for a variety of reasons. A little bit, I think, roughly 5 days after the protests started, on December 28th, you had the Iranian government come out and try to quell this by offering the rioters, a buyout of $7 per person per month in order to ease economic tensions, which were supposedly the main reason that the protests had kicked off. Then you had a series of cyber attacks that were initiated by what appears to be Israel, specifically Unit 8200 in Mossad. And then we also had a bunch of rioters, specifically Kurdish forces, as well as other mountainous tribes that are in the western part of Iran, were armed by, Iran claims, Western-backed factions, meaning Israel and America. And then you also had Elon Musk, using Starlink, helped to push a lot of the propaganda that America was trying to get out to the protesters, to the rioters, in order to expand the riots and really further push for regime change. Part of this propaganda push one of the main factors in this propaganda push, was the son of the former Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. For those of you who don't know, the Shah was effectively a monarch who was instituted into power in Iran prior to the Iranian Revolution that led to the installation of the current Ayatollah Khomeini. But the son of the Shah has been, since these riots started, he's just been itching to get back into power in Iran. He had a variety of press statements that he released that were encouraging these people to go out and continue these protests. He even encouraged basically armed rebellion against the government. He urged the rioters to take over governmental institutions and take back power. This was seemingly going according to plan until the Iranian government cut the internet. Now, a lot of the Western factions in the media are claiming that the internet was cut in order to not show the slaughter that would soon follow. The slaughter being the IRGC and besieged militias indiscriminately firing into crowds in order to quell the riots. But this is not the full spectrum of the story. They really, in my estimation, cut the internet in order to stop getting this flow of Western propaganda into the country that were calling for the protests to continue. And it has worked brilliantly. They not only cut access to the internet, which is still ongoing, and I didn't include this in my notes, but as of this point in time, I believe that the internet has been out in Iran for roughly 180 hours. They're approaching the 200-hour mark. The Iranian government has came out and said that they do not plan on reinstituting internet access nationwide until March. From this point forward, they're only going to allow internet access to citizens who are part of the Iranian government. And even when March hits, they're stating, as of this point in time, that they do not intend to allow Iranian citizens to have internet access that spans outside of their own country. But them squashing the internet for the vast majority of the population has worked extremely well. They seem to have completely quelled the riots at this point in time. They've instituted martial law. I've even seen videos of rather small towns having huge convoys of government forces come in order to basically keep the peace, even if they have to use violent means to do so. Now, part of the internet being squashed in Iran was to stop the press releases from Reza Pahlavi, who again is the son of the former Shah, because he was getting on certain videos tens of millions of views, some anywhere between 30 and 40 million views per video, where he was calling for these uprisings. Since Iran cut the internet access, his views have been cut down to roughly 10% of what he was initially receiving, which you can only guess that means that roughly 30 to 40 million Iranians were watching those press releases. But he's been trying to continuously give out these press releases, even if nobody or next to no one is watching. And recently, in his last press release, he said that, quote, "I will return to Iran. I ask all of you brave compatriots across Iran to raise your voices of anger and protest on Saturday," which is today, through January 19th, which is Monday, starting tonight in Iran at approximately 8 p.m., with national slogans, and show the world that the end to these anti-Iranian and un-Iranian criminals is near. Now, a big factor, although I would argue that it really has nothing to do with Trump's greater plan for Iran currently, he came out stating that the main factor, his main deciding factor in whether or not he was going to actually carry out any meaningful form of strike against the Iranian regime, was whether or not they were going to carry out the executions of the protesters that they have imprisoned. The last time that I covered this, I believe the number was roughly 10,600 protesters that had been imprisoned. Since then, there have been another 9,000 people imprisoned that the Iranian government has targeted. Now, Trump came out in a statement, which again, as I think I said, and perhaps if I didn't, I will reiterate. He said that as long as the Iranian government doesn't execute these protesters, that he will hold off a strike for the time being. And just in a press release earlier today, he said, quote, "I greatly respect the fact that all scheduled hangings, which were to take place yesterday, over 800 of them, have been canceled by the leadership of Iran. Thank you." Following this, The chief prosecutor in Tehran said that the executions would proceed as planned, brushing off a post by Trump as baseless, in remarks underscoring the regime's refusal to slow its crackdown. Following this, Trump then just outright called for new leadership in Iran. And there were advisors within the Trump administration claiming that Trump, following that statement, felt more emboldened now than ever following the Venezuelan operation, which overthrew Maduro within a matter of hours. Insider sources are now claiming that J.D. Vance fully backed U.S. strikes on Iran this week, which is rather interesting because J.D. Vance was leaking these stories to the press, stating that he did not want these strikes to happen. Now, anyone that knows his stances on this in the past knows that he does want these strikes to happen, which, again, insider sources are proving now. And the reason that he wanted to put that stance out publicly as opposing an Iranian regime change is because he knows the turmoil that it could possibly cause. If the Ayatollah is to be overthrown, you could easily see not only conflict break out in surrounding countries between forces that support the Ayatollah, but you could also really see a flat-out civil war within the country as people fight to grab power once that seat is vacant. And J.D. Vance knows that if his name is tied to that potential overthrow, if there is a massive conflict that breaks out not only in Iran but across the rest of the Middle East, he doesn't want that he doesn't want that scar on his name leading into potentially a renewed presidential run as soon as this term is done. But just to sort of what's the word I'm looking for here? Just to sort of reinstate the overall goal of not only America and Israel, Netanyahu told Trump that the reason he wanted him to wait is because Israel needs more time to restock their air defense supplies that had been depleted during the 12 Days War that happened in June. Israeli Channel 12, citing senior American officials, said that, quote, "A U.S. attack on Iran will absolutely happen, and it is only a matter of time, with Washington actively preparing for action. Israel and the United States are talking daily about the possibility of an Iranian attack." Israel also said that one of the reasons that they wanted Trump to hold off is because they didn't think that his proposed plan was strong enough, and they wanted to ensure that if they were to strike, that it would, in fact, lead to regime change. They wanted it to be an absolute strike. Israeli Channel 15 also said, quote, "Israel is preparing a major preemptive attack against Hezbollah if the Lebanese group prepares to intervene in the event of a U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran." An IDF spokesperson said, "Over the past few weeks, we have the strengthened capabilities and increased readiness along all of our borders. The IDF is continuously prepared on a broad scale, both defensively and offensively. There were also 3 brand new American-made Lockheed F-35s that were transferred to Israel that are currently en route to Israel as part of a renewed U.S. delivery talks between Netanyahu and Trump." So they're clearly preparing for these strikes to happen. I've even seen intel leaks showing that the Iron Dome defense batteries are being transported to strategic locations throughout Israel. The New York Times, citing a U.S. official, said that an array of warplanes, likely to include a combination of fighter jets, attack planes, and refueling planes, are expected to start flowing into the Middle East soon. We're also currently waiting on the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is a United States aircraft carrier, which is in a larger part a U.S. Naval Strike Force group that includes submarines, it includes frigates, really just a lot of other naval support. We're currently waiting on it to arrive in the Middle East, and it should be there within the next few days. Once this happens, we will have enough American firepower in the region for America to be ready to carry out these strikes. Whether or not Israel will greenlight it as soon as that ship arrives, that convoy of ships arrive, is still to be determined. Satellite imagery has been indicating that the United States and Saudi Arabia have evacuated non-essential aircraft from Prince Sultan Air Base, leaving only tanker aircraft at the facility. The European Union is now advising all European airlines to avoid using Iranian airspace. Senator Lindsey Graham then, in a statement today on X, I believe, said, quote, "I just landed in Israel, and if you think that I flew all the way to Israel after having not slept much in days to make sure we do not hold the Ayatollah's murderous regime accountable for the slaughter of its own people, being the largest state sponsor of terrorism with America's blood on its hands, and who has an endless quest to cheat and obtain a nuclear weapon to advance their sick religious Nazi beliefs, then you have missed a lot." Lindsey Graham has been up in arms the last few days specifically over Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Iraq coming out in what was effectively a joint statement saying that they did not want America to carry out this attack because of potential ramifications in their own countries. There's currently a U.S. air base in Qatar. There's bases throughout Iraq. And then you also have U.S. troops that are stationed in Saudi Arabia, specifically at the Prince Sultan Air Base. There's anywhere between 23 and 2,700 U.S. troops there at any given time. And there are also THAAD missile systems, there's Patriot missile systems, all stationed at this airbase in Saudi Arabia. They currently fear retaliation from Iran. And so anyway, they came out in what was effectively a joint statement saying that they wanted the U.S. to hold off, and they even claimed, what's the word I'm looking for here? They basically claimed that they were the reason that America held off the initial attack. Now, that's not the case. It really had to do with Trump's advisors saying that he didn't have enough support in the region, enough firepower in the region, mainly in the form of the carrier strike group that is currently headed there. But Lindsey Graham, in the past week, has just been giddy as all hell. He cannot wait for this war to happen. There's not a single war that I can think of in recent memory that he has not supported. And when Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Iraq came out stating that they had pressured Trump not to carry out this strike, he was absolutely furious. And quite frankly, I can kind of see where he's coming from. And I don't think it's a good idea for us to carry out these strikes. I would like to see the Ayatollah regime be toppled, but I would like it to be done. I would like it to be something that is done within the country if the citizenry can pull it off themselves. I don't want to see us to commit to a ground war, which, in my estimation, is the only way that we will be able to pull this off. In fact, there were intel leaks stating that the Knesset had recently been basically running war games for ground invasions. So it's definitely something that is at least on the table. And that's something that I don't want to see happen. I don't want to see a civil war in Iran completely destabilize the region. But nevertheless, when he did come out, I thought I'd just comment on this briefly. I could understand where he was coming from when he was pissed that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Iraq were bossing us around. Saudi Arabia specifically. it was Mohammed bin Salman, who is the current prince of Saudi Arabia, who claimed that, or actually he might be the king of Saudi Arabia now. I'm not sure if his father has died. I know that he was on pretty shaky health ground. But anyway, he was basically claiming responsibility for this attack being called off. And it just drives me insane how countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who the only reason that they have any power whatsoever is America's support, that they feel emboldened because of their oil wealth that we gave them, to boss us around and how we use our assets that are stationed in their country for their defense. So it's okay if we defend their borders, we fight their wars, but if we want to conduct any form of military operation that may have negative consequences in those countries, well, now they're the deciding factor in whether or not we can fight those wars. The only reason that Saudi Arabia has any fucking power whatsoever is because the grandfather of Mohammed bin Salman, Ibn Saud, made an oil deal with FDR in the late 40s. The trillions of dollars of oil wealth that they currently possess is 100% our doing. It was our trade, our defense treaties that allowed them to claim that wealth. Also, there was recently a defense pact that Trump authorized with Saudi Arabia, allowing them the purchase of 48 F-35s. It was a $148 billion deal. Well, if you're going to determine how we're conducting wars in that region, how about we just not give you 48 F-35s? How about we go ahead and take that fucking $148 billion anyway? How about we station 3 aircraft carrier strike groups off your fucking coast and then see who's talking shit? It drives me nuts how these Muslims get a bit of oil wealth and then they think that they run the fucking world. The only reason you have any power at all, the only reason that you hold the seat that you have is because we gave it to you. So who in the hell are you to dictate to us what we can and can't do with our military capabilities in the region? But, and again, I don't want to see Iran go into a full-blown civil war. I don't want to see all the casualties that will amass from that. I don't want to see the rest of the Middle East completely, again, be even more dissolved than it is in a series of more elongated conflicts. And Saudi Arabia, now, okay, back on, I guess, the side, quote unquote, of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iraq, one of the reasons that they don't want this to happen is because they currently have a ton of different conflicts in the region which are being played out, and which they would like to settle somewhat before this kicks off any further, and they feel as though they might be able to stabilize the region somewhat, and they don't want to see this Iranian conflict hurt their current conflict. So in Syria, you have, and this doesn't have to do with Saudi Arabia, but to some degree it has to do with all of the surrounding nation states around Syria. So in Syria currently, and it has to do with Israel, you have this former ISIS commander, what's his name? Al-Shara. His name is now Al-Shara. Oh, Al-Jalani is what his ISIS name was. Now his name is Al-Shara. He is a leader that was instated by the United States and by Israel to hopefully stabilize the region. Israel had more reasons than simply stabilization in Syria to put him in that position of power. They were hoping to expand their influence in Syria. But you currently have this guy who we instated in a seat of power, and this relates to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, openly telling us what the hell to do in that region. he starts attacking Kurdish forces, which the United States and Israel have supported for a very long time, for decades. And United States Central Command came out today basically urging him to step down and stop this push of forces. He claimed that he wanted nothing to do with the hurting of the Kurds. He wanted to see the fighting stop. And in that same day, he sent military convoy after military convoy to the western portion of the Jordan River and continued to carry out a variety of strikes on these forces. Israel and the United States have it in our own interest to see these Kurdish forces not get squashed, specifically in countering potential aggression by Damascus and the rest of these forces that are being headed by this former leader of ISIS in al-Shara. Then also, aside from Syria, you currently have the UAE and Yemen, which is a huge problem for Saudi Arabia. Yemen has been an ongoing conflict with Saudi Arabia forever, and really it hasn't been much of a match at all until the UAE decided to get involved in all of their oil wealth. There's been a ton of recent clashes recently between UAE-backed forces and Saudi-backed forces in the region to take control of not only parts of Yemen, but they're also, at this point in time, also squabbling for control of portions of the UAE itself. And with all of this turmoil going on, Saudi Arabia has turned away from its former allegiance to the UAE and started looking for other partners in the region to try and stabilize. They've been looking towards Egypt, Somalia, Pakistan, and Turkey. And recently, they have tried to build a defense coalition, which, although it has not materialized yet, they're currently in the midst of working it out between those 5 countries, Saudi Arabia being included in that. And so while all of this is going on, these oil-rich nations in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, will even throw Iraq in there. They do not want this Iranian conflict to take place at the moment. Never mind the fact that Saudi Arabia has a ton of interest in Iran being economically destabilized. They could have potential economic benefits if it's completely destabilized through something like a civil war. But if the United States is to install effectively a renewed monarchy through Reza Pahlavi, and the sanctions and everything else are lifted within the next few years or even decade, that could be a huge problem for Saudi Arabia. Okay, now that that's perhaps behind us, that rant. Anyways, U.S. intelligence... Hold on. Let me just make sure. Yep, I knew I was going to be out of focus. You know what? Let me take a drink really quick, because it's going to go out of focus the second I raise up this Yeti cup. Might as well take a sip first. Hey, it went into focus. Okay. Not bad. Double chin looks like shit, but somewhat focused. Okay, back at it. So U.S. intelligence believes that the Syrian government is preparing a large-scale offensive into the SDF-controlled northeast Syria with the backing of Turkey. The offensive would put Syrian and Turkish troops in direct contact against U.S. troops deployed in the region. And then as far as Iraq goes, a senior figure in the Iran-backed Hezbollah Brigade's militia in Iraq has threatened that their missiles and drones are ready to strike U.S. bases in Iraq and in the region if the United States goes to war with Iran. He said that during Israel's campaign against Iran, there has been an instruction from Iran's supreme leader that the militias should not intervene in the conflict. Okay. That's the end of Iran. Now on to Greenland, Canada, and all of the latest happenings there. Germany is considering deploying frigates and Eurofighter jets in Greenland. On January 16, 2026, Germany's Minister of Defense confirmed its readiness to significantly increase its military contribution to Greenland's security. Berlin is considering the deployment of heavy equipment to this island. You know what? Before I finish this, give me just a second, guys. I have the heat on in my room. It's absolutely killing me. I'm going to turn it down. Sorry for that. We don't need the starting soon window. We need the be right back window. Here we go. Told you I'd be right back. Did that in a flat 2 seconds. Okay. So, Greenland and Canada. We got through Germany deploying frigates and Eurofighter jets into Greenland. Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, urged NATO to build a coordinated presence in the Arctic to prevent quote-unquote interference. The policy document pointed to Russia's renewed focus on the Arctic, including a buildup of its military presence there. It also highlighted China's efforts to raise its Arctic profile as a self-declared near-Arctic state, noting growing interest in the shipping alone in the northeastern sea route and closer ties to Moscow that extend into military cooperation. Now, she wasn't the only person that came out with a statement very similar to this, where they were mainly just focusing on increased NATO military presence in Greenland to specifically counter Chinese and Russian influence in the region that could potentially influence or even overthrow Greenland in the future. Now, I came out with a statement on my last podcast addressing this, and I thought initially that this entire play was specifically, again, it's not only Meloni stating that they're doing this to, like I said, build and increase NATO military presence in Greenland, but they're specifically doing that to deter China and Russia from their efforts at increased presence in the Arctic. So it wasn't just her. You also had I believe he's the Prime Minister or President of Greenland. He came out with a statement after meeting with a community of European officials who had agreed to send troops to the region. He came out in a statement basically saying this exact same thing. And in that statement, he said that they were doing this to, quote-unquote, quell American concerns of Greenland's security. Now, it was my thought that perhaps Trump was really doing all of this talk of militarily invading Greenland so that NATO would step up on its end, as it's always not willing to step up to, whether it be their own defense budgets in their own countries or abroad in a region like Greenland, where these European countries like Denmark do have what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think today. Sorry guys, sometimes these brain farts hit me at the worst goddamn times, you know. They have a stated effort, a stated goal to secure these regions which they supposedly control, and they're not holding up their end of the bargain with NATO. I thought that Trump was doing all of this in order to get these European countries to send troops and military equipment to Greenland to protect it from a potential Chinese or Russian effort to take over that massive island. Now, recently, it seems as though that's not the case, but I guess, you know what, just to kind of push that to the side. I'll get right back to that. One of the major updates, and this is sort of what I titled as being the main story. I guess it was a little bit clickbaity, so I apologize. This just has to do with our United States interest definitely needing some form of increased military or financial security over Greenland, because to deter Chinese and Russian influence, because you just a day or two ago had Mark Carney, who is the Prime Minister of Canada, he did meet in Beijing with Xi Jinping. They signed a number of important deals, seen as a breakthrough in relations between the countries after a couple of frosty years. China said that they will lower retaliatory tariffs on Canada, specifically related to rapeseed products, to a combined rate of approximately 15%, down from 100%. Canada said that in return, they would allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian markets at a preferential rate of 6.1%, also down from 100%, which is what it was at before these talks. Other agreements include cooperation in energy and agriculture and in finance, were also made during that meeting. So, not only do we have to worry about Chinese presence and influence in Greenland, but now, with people like Mark Carney, we also have to worry about Chinese influence in Canada. And it wouldn't necessarily seem like that on its face when I read that to you. You know, China's upping its amount of electric vehicles that it can send to Canada. Canada's now able to send rapeseed products, which is their main thing that they were talking about there was canola oil, because, you know, Canada doesn't produce shit other than canola oil and fucking maple syrup. But you also have in these agreements renewed cooperation in energy and agriculture and finance, which I'll get to in a second, but agriculture specifically. Let's look at America, for instance. We allowed China to start buying up farmland all across the United States. Well, what did they do when they bought up that farmland? Every single bit of that farmland was strategically placed next to military installations, U.S. military installations. Never mind the fact that they have literally Chinese government-sponsored police forces within America in major cities like New York City to fight against political dissidents of Chinese nationality. But they also had infrastructure, which the degree of which perhaps we don't know and we won't know. But they also were buying up agriculture land plots next to military bases in America. Well, now they're going to be investing in agriculture in Canada. So they'll obviously be buying agricultural land next to strategic military installations of the Canadians. Now, Canada doesn't really have shit for a military to begin with. Certainly not by American standards. Perhaps by global standards, but not by American standards. Because they know that America will protect its hemisphere. Well, what happens? We just recently, I don't remember exactly who all is involved. I know that Trump had he played a big part in it, but it wasn't just him. You also had other U.S. senators and representatives who are stopping the sale of U.S. farmland to China. You also had some states, some representatives and senators within certain states that are outright banning China to allow that property whatsoever. Because, again, it's next to critical military infrastructure. Well, all they did was just move north now. So now China is going to start taking strategic positions with the farmland that they buy in China, while simultaneously making deals on finance. Well, what do they do financially with every country that they do financial deals with? Let's look at Africa, for instance. They make these huge loans that basically indebt the countries that they're lending to indefinitely to China. And a lot of those deals include them selling Chinese equipment, critical infrastructural equipment, to those countries that inevitably have back ends and workarounds that the Chinese government can access at later dates. So if they're selling them critical equipment for their energy grids, critical equipment for their oil fields, whatever it may be, all of this electrical equipment that they will be selling, that they will be financing, will have workarounds that will just be another layer of the security process that we have to worry about in the future. So that was a huge development insofar as the Carney and Xi meeting went, and it really just reinstated the necessity to me that we do need to have control of Greenland. Now, how we're going to do it, frankly, I don't know. Because, again, as I was stating earlier, you had people like Georgia Maloney, and, well, I'm trying to think of who it would be. The King of Denmark, I suppose, coming out and stating that they were doing all of this troop movement and military equipment movement into Greenland, specifically to deter China and Russia. But one of the strategic parts of them moving those troops into that region, into that country, is that the United States now is more than ever deterred from any sort of actual boots-on-the-ground military intervention. If it wasn't bad enough that they were part of NATO, now you have troops from countries like, here I have a list of them. You have troops from countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, all sending troops to the country so that if we attack, which I don't think that that was likely in the first place, but if we were to carry out some sort of military invasion that would potentially involve troops from these countries, I mean specifically Denmark, the government of Denmark stated that they were willing to go to war. They would not tolerate any U.S. aggression on their shores, and that they would strike first if need be. And so now that you have all of these other European countries there, if we were to do any sort of invasion that would result in some form of troop casualties, well, now we've effectively just killed troops that are a part of almost every single country within the European Union. Insofar as that goes, we would have effectively attacked all of NATO. Let's see, what else did I have here? So, following this, Trump announced that the USA will put 10% tariffs on all goods from Denmark and a number of European countries on February 1st for sending troops to Greenland. He said, quote, "Because of the Golden Dome and modern-day weapon systems, both offensive and defensive, the need to acquire is especially important. Therefore, it is imperative that, in order to protect global peace and security, strong measures must be taken so that this potentially perilous situation ends quickly and without question. Starting on February 1st, 2026, all of the above-mentioned countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, will be charged a 10% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America. On June 1st, 2026, the tariff will be increased to 25%. This tariff will be due and payable until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland." So, what Trump is now trying to do is, rather than trying to force Denmark and slash Greenland to the negotiation table for the purchase of Greenland, which as of recently does seem like it is absolutely on the table. They're offering a $700 billion buyout for Greenland in order to avoid potential military conflict with the rest of NATO. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. They're trying to persuade these countries that sent those troops through tariffs to withdraw them because of the economic strain that these tariffs will inevitably put on them. They're trying to persuade them to now withdraw their troops and finish up negotiations for the full-blown purchase of Greenland. So, once again, even without the rest of these troops there, even after they withdraw, I do not believe that any form of legitimate military intervention is likely. Trump's talking a big game to force them to the table and get this deal done. Now, do I want to spend $700 billion on Greenland? I don't understand who in the hell that would potentially benefit other than Fortune 500 companies within America. That might be good for some people's Roth IRAs, but for the average citizen, that will amount to next to nothing. It may amount to mining jobs for people within Greenland, but the only economic benefit through the mineral wealth that could be potentially outputted in the future would be absorbed by Fortune 500 companies that can afford to send the equipment and the necessary resources there to actually start extracting that wealth. Now, to reiterate the point that the likelihood of us actually doing some form of military intervention is not likely, House Speaker Mike Johnson said today that he does not foresee U.S. military intervention in Greenland, also stating that diplomatic channels is the way to go and the president is merely playing chess, which is what I had said in my last podcast. Now, if we were to be extremely serious about actually doing some form of military intervention in Greenland, or we were to outright withdraw from NATO as a means to, that in and of itself would force those troops to withdraw, because the second that we withdraw from NATO, all of these countries that we have troops stationed in, that we spend billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars protecting every single year, they would then have to start completely holding up their side of the bargain and fully securing their own borders. And they would not be able to afford to continue to have troops stationed in Greenland. They would have to completely rethink their entire military strategy if that were to happen. But I just thought that I'd throw this in there for shits and gigs. The downsides of NATO withdrawal if we were to be serious. So, firstly, allies would question U.S. reliability, which could potentially unravel other security agreements that we have with other countries, whether it be Japan, South Korea, Australia. And that could lead to a cascade where nations hedge alignment with our allies, with our adversaries, as opposed to with America. And that could isolate us diplomatically. It would also boost, it's not certain, but it would almost certainly boost aggression by our adversaries. Russia could potentially accelerate territorial grabs in Europe, as they're already doing, especially if the United States was to start to not defend countries like Ukraine, although with the hundreds of billions of dollars that we currently have tied up in it, and the mineral deals that we've signed for future use once the war is settled, I highly doubt that we would stop defending Ukraine. But if we were to stop defending the rest of Europe, who's to say that Russia would not start aggression with former Soviet states, whether it be Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. China could also potentially grow bolder in Asia. If once we withdraw from NATO, these countries that we have other security pacts with, whether it's Japan or Korea, who's to say that China doesn't move in aggressively in these, especially like Korea or Japan, countries that they have had historically long-standing conflicts with, whether it be in the most recent Korean Wars, in which you had America backing South Korea, and you had China as a communist state backing North Korea, or in past conflicts throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, like the Sino-Japanese Wars. It could also diminish military projection and access. So the U.S. could potentially, and this is something that Georgia Maloney hinted at, we could lose access to U.S. bases that we currently have stationed throughout all of Europe. And that would seriously, that would arguably affect all of Europe far more than it affects us. But in future conflicts, it would seriously be detrimental to our ability to project power throughout Europe. Like I said, Georgia Maloney had mentioned this. She, I don't have the exact quote, but she basically said, if the U.S. is serious about withdrawing from NATO, what are we now going to seriously be in talks about completely dismantling U.S. bases in the region? And those bases, you could argue, have been the main bolstering force. There's since been other financial and diplomatic solutions that have helped bolster peace in Europe. But I would argue that U.S. bases being stationed all throughout Europe has been the main cause of peace in Europe since World War II. There's been all kinds of power struggles throughout all of the world, but as far as Europe goes, since the end of World War II, there's been next to none, other than, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Eastern Germany was reconsolidated with the rest of Germany. Other than these former Soviet states, such as Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, joining NATO, despite that, there's really been no power struggles whatsoever amongst these now against these European states. Nation states, rather. The last thing that I'll say in regards to potential downsides to NATO withdrawal is economic losses from trade and markets. There is a possibility that the reduced security commitments could slash U.S. bilateral trade by hundreds of billions of dollars. So if the $700 billion that we're about to potentially spend on Greenland isn't enough, well, that would be the diplomatic workaround. That would include us not withdrawing from NATO and us simply purchasing it. But we could lose hundreds of billions of dollars in trade if we were to withdraw from NATO. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let me take a sip of this and probably refocus my camera. Yep, I'm out of focus. Well, that's so weird. I'm going out of focus for no reason. Maybe it's the hand gestures, I don't know. But now I'm back in focus. It used to be I'd take a drink, I'd go out of focus, but now it's the opposite. Okay, Venezuela. There's really no updates here, but I thought I'd just comment on it briefly. Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner of, she's not the opposition leader, but she is opposition. She's not the opposition leader because she's not currently in Venezuela. She's in America. But Venezuelan opposition and Nobel Peace Prize winner of 2024, Maria Corina Machado, presented Trump with her Nobel Peace Medal. Trump has been stating forever that he wants his own Nobel Peace Prize. And she, in her own play to grab power and hope and pray that Trump installs her as the new leader of Venezuela, presented him with her own Nobel Peace Prize. This pissed off all kinds of people. specifically within the Nobel community, that she would hand over her own prize. Trump was thrilled with it, but nevertheless, it does not seem as though that has done her any favors. After she did this, she, in a statement of pure arrogance, said that she will be president of Venezuela when the right time comes. Well, I hate to break it to you, Maria, but the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, met with Venezuela's acting leaders in Caracas just a few days ago, which is a huge snub to the opposition, which until recently, and by recently I mean within the last few days, Trump was actually currently in talks with, mainly to try and persuade the current Venezuelan president, the former vice president, to not snub America in our demands for oil and everything else in that territory. But as of now, it seems as though the current acting leaders in Venezuela are doing our bidding, and so much so that the CIA director is currently in active talks with them. Donald Trump announced the first Venezuelan oil sale deal that goes to his mega donors company. The initial deal, worth about $250 million, went to Vitol, the world's largest independent oil trader. Addison, who I don't have his first name, but that is the CEO of this company, the mega donor. Addison gave $5 million in October 2024 to MAGA Inc., and more than $1 million to two other Trump-aligned political action committees. And this just goes to show that at the end of the day, the people who are donating money, they ultimately get what they want, and everybody else gets screwed, even his closest supporters. All of the promises that he made about, Epstein, about mass deportations, all of it, about ending the Ukraine war, all of that's still not happened. But, he can overthrow entire governments for people that are donating to his fucking campaigns. He can do that, no problem. And as Proverbs says, the borrower is subject to the lender. As far as immigration goes, last year we had 325,000 deportations. So there's no such thing as mass deportations going on. Just a reminder, Obama deported 2 million people per year in his second term. That's not right. He deported 2 million people per year in his... Hold on. Let me Google this. Either way, Trump is deporting far less than Obama. Google's deciding to not answer my question. Okay, it's basically what I thought, 1.5 million. So he deported 1.5 million people per year in his second term. Trump deported 325,000 last year. And just as a reminder, he was installed in the beginning of the year. So he had the entire year to start mass deportations. He's currently nowhere near... Mass deportations would be anywhere from 3 to 4 million. That's mass deportations. He's currently doing roughly a tenth of that. And I just say this because, and I'm going to go into the rest of my immigration speech here, but it really plays into what I was stating, which is that his donors get everything they want, and then the everyday people get screwed. So, despite the deportations that aren't happening, the Epstein files, we still don't have those. He, and by he I mean Trump, announced that he was going to be authorizing over 100,000 H-1B visas for Indians, and he was going to approve 600,000 student visas for Chinese students. And while all of this is going on, the Ukraine war is still ongoing. And Trump, as far as immigration is gone, even though you have all of this this huge theatrical display by the media in regards to the current happenings in Minneapolis, specifically all of the uprisings over the shooting of Renee Good, even though you have all of this leftist backlash, we're still not doing anything near mass deportations, and all of the hysteria, aside from the hysteria of Renee Good, is really just made up bullshit. Now, back to the people that donated to his committee getting what he wants. Even though we're not getting mass deportations, Palantir is currently working on a tool for immigration and customs enforcement that populates a map with potential deportation targets. It brings up a dossier on each person and provides a confidence score on the person's current address. All that's going to happen with that, because we already know that they're not going to use it effectively, at the very least, on the people that they want to deport. Who in the hell do you think that that's going to get used on when Trump goes out of office? You think that the Biden government wouldn't have used something like that to their benefit to target certain people within the Republican government? After January 6th, for instance, they got everybody anyways. But imagine if they had a tool like Palantir. They would have had everybody arrested the next fucking day if they had a tool like that. So these people that donate to the campaign, whether it be Teal or the guy that I was saying, the CEO of VTOL, who gets the first oil deal in Venezuela, they always get what they want, and the average American gets screwed at the end of the day. Now, I guess I'll try to end this on a bit more of a positive note, if possible. One of the current updates to what's going on in Minneapolis is that Trump is finally deploying National Guard to Minneapolis to quell the protests, although he still has not invoked the Insurrection Act like he claimed he was going to. And we'll see just how serious that National Guard mobilization is. If he were to actually invoke the Insurrection Act, you could see that entire situation be solved within a week or two, now that the National Guard is deployed. So we'll have to see if he's actually serious about this. And then one more thing pointing towards the fact that he may be serious about this is that, and this made me laugh, and it's kind of horrible, but it did make me laugh. Federal officials are investigating the widow of Renee Nicole Good to determine whether she may have impeded federal officers moments before he shot and killed her wife in Minneapolis. It made me laugh because it's horrible. That woman is going through a terrible time after her wife was shot and killed in Minneapolis. But it's kind of funny and, somewhat reassuring that federal officials are still investigating her as being part of exactly what was happening there, because that woman was, and that woman, by saying that woman, I mean Renee Nicole Good. She was impeding ICE officers all day. She was harassing them. And we now know that she did hit the ICE officer that shot her. That guy had internal bleeding, we now know. So she did hit him. I don't even want to call her wife, her lover, was the one that you can hear in the video, or at least we believe she is the one that you could hear in the video, screaming, "Drive, baby, drive." So, in other words, she basically incited her to carry out what led to her demise and what could have potentially led to the death of that ICE officer who, by the way, that was not his first time being hit by a car doing his job. He had also been hit one other time, I think, like a year or so ago. That guy was like a 20-year veteran that shot her. So, anyways, that should give, right-leaning people a little bit of hope that Trump is actually serious in trying to quell this, because if he's willing to send federal officials after the widow of Renee Good, then perhaps he is serious, because that is a rather that's a pretty dark thing to do, but ultimately it is necessary. Now, we also have, I saw this video of a leftist activist who went by the name of TJ at a local Salt Lake City council meeting in Utah. She, I don't even know if it was a woman, but she came out stating that she currently runs Ice Watch. She claimed that she coordinated the group with over 20,000 migrants and currently maintains a photo database targeting ICE agents. So if federal officials are going to go after anybody, I'd say put Renee Good's widow on hold and go after this fucking bitch, because she's actively doxing ICE agents as it currently stands. Now, as far as states go, the only state that knows how to do this shit right, apparently, is Florida. Florida's CFO came out in a statement stating that, quote, "We should start charging the politicians who vote for sanctuary policies and make them accessories to the crimes committed by illegal immigrants in those areas." I totally agree. And also, there was recently a interview that Sean Hannity did with this U.S. representative in Michigan. The guy's name is Sri Thanadar. Now, if you don't know who this guy is, if you ask me, he doesn't deserve to be a U.S. citizen, let alone a fucking U.S. representative. The guy barely speaks English. You should go watch this Hannity interview that he did. Hannity questioned him on his refusal to support a bill in which Michigan was looking to deport illegal immigrants within the state that had committed violent crimes, specifically targeting sexual abusers within the illegal immigrant community. This guy voted against it, and he made the typical excuse, well, in his Indian accent, well, there were other things in the bill that I could not support. And then he goes, well, what were those other things? And he had no answer for it. And so as far as the Florida CFO goes, start stating that we should start charging the politicians who vote for the sanctuary policies, I totally fucking agree. And let's start with this fucking Jeet. Start with him. And the reason that he didn't want to support that bill is because, again, he's a Michigan representative, and you have all of these Muslim majority communities, sometimes just outright only Muslim communities like in Hamtramck, but also in the more known communities like Dearborn, that are supporting these politicians. I say kick him the fuck out. He shouldn't have a position of power. Just get him the hell out. Alright, now that I'm done with that rant, on to the economy. The economy's in the fucking shitter. I hate to break it to you. CNBC recently came out stating that U.S. wage growth has struggled to keep pace with inflation since 2020, meaning many workers are earning less in real terms than before the pandemic. Even though minimum wages rose, consumer prices often rose faster. I also have this consumer goods chart, which I'll show you in just a second. This is a consumer goods chart showing what I was just stating, that the raise in wages although it's staying steady with inflation, you still have these other hurdles to jump over, like the increased cost of living. So the only thing that has gone down in price are eggs. They're down 20%, gasoline's down 3%, but everything else is up. New cars up 0.5%, clothing up 0.5%, groceries up 2.5%, Vehicle parts and equipment up 3.5%. Furniture and bedding up 3.5%. Housing up 3.5%. Beef and veal up 16.4%. Coffee up 19.8%, which, by the way, if you've bought coffee lately, holy shit, it's expensive. Why? For what reason? 20%? And then you also have video rentals and subscriptions. They're up 29%. So your Netflixes, your Hulus, all that shit, that's all up 30% too. All right, enough with that. Oh, sorry, I gotta go back to my camera window. We'll finish this up here. According to newly released figures, more than 367,000 U.S. properties have entered some stage of foreclosure last year. That represents so people are foreclosing on their houses. They're basically going belly up on their home loans. So 367,000 foreclosures last year. That represents a 14% uptick compared to the year before, a trend experts say could accelerate further in 2026 if current economic conditions persist or worsen. And then, last but not least, Ukraine. We'll go ahead and wrap this up after Ukraine. I can't believe I've been going an hour. I'll refocus this one more time before I... This goddamn camera, man. I got to get a better camera. Come on. You can do it. Focus. Focus. Come on. Seriously. Thank you. All right. On to Ukraine. So Ukraine's defense minister. Well, I guess I'll just start off by saying this. So the last podcast I did, I had mentioned that Trump recently came out stating that he believes it's Zelensky holding up peace deals in Ukraine and not Putin. Although he did specify that is a change from how it has been in the past. Russia has been winning this war hands down. They have all the territory that they wanted when the war initially kicked off. And by Trump's statement that Zelensky is the one holding up this deal, you would think that Ukraine is in a position of power. Perhaps they're just now starting to make big advances towards Russia, and to some degree they are. I mean, they've been successfully striking oil tankers. They also had this huge operation a few months back, 3-4 months ago, where they were able to sneak trucks into Russia that had armed drones aboard these trucks that strategically targeted a huge portion of Russia's Air Force. They took out roughly a third of Russia's known Air Force in this attack. So they have had a lot of big uprises within the last few months. But not everything is so bright and sunny as you're about to see. So Ukraine's defense minister came out and stated that 2 million Ukrainian men are now draft dodgers, and 200,000 Ukrainians are officially AWOL. Ukraine's defense ministry is operating at a staggering deficit of nearly $7 billion. And following a ton of missile strikes that Russia has carried out on Ukraine and Kiev specifically recently, Kiev's governor, I believe, came out stating that they're only receiving half of the electricity that it needs. Kiev is only receiving half the electricity it needs. The capital is facing its most severe energy crisis since the start of the war due to Russian attacks on infrastructure. The city of 3.6 million people requires 1,700 megawatts of electricity, but is currently only receiving about half. And in contrast to what Trump said about Zelensky holding this up, and perhaps, I guess, upholding some of the statements that I just said about how poorly Ukraine is doing, the president of Czechia Peter Pavel came out in a statement saying that Ukraine is ready to make a number of painful concessions in order to end the conflict. Quote, I believe there are a number of painful concessions that Ukraine would have to make and is ready to make, provided that this leads to peace, Pavel said following talks with Zelensky. Also, agreements with the U.S. on guarantees for Ukraine's security are expected to be signed in Davos next week. And then lastly, Putin, believe it or not, which he said this before and not been serious about it, so we'll see. But Putin has recently said that Russia stands ready to restore relations with all European countries. Now, within that same breath, he also said that if Europe ramps up aggression in the region, that they would be willing to respond militarily. And this follows a ton of different hypersonic missiles that were launched. Or sorry, they weren't hypersonic, but they were intercontinental missiles that they had launched targeting different Ukrainian oil depots that were on the border of neighboring European countries. Okay. We got through it. It took longer than I thought it would. If you stuck around, I really, really appreciate it. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment too. That does a ton of good work for us. That helps the algorithm a ton. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll see you on the next one. I'll probably be doing my next podcast on probably Monday. I should be ready by Monday. We'll see, though. The news flow has been just unending lately with all of this Iran bullshit. Oh, my God. It just won't end. So please, like I said, stick around. We'll have plenty more for you. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, guys. Peace.